This is Bend, Book 1 in the Bend and Break Duet, written by Grahame Clare, narrated by Avery Karras and Connor Crace.
Prologue. Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Neither of us looked at one another. I do. There was no emotion, certainly no love, just a flat, monotone statement. I felt guilty, desperate, and he no doubt felt a mixture of anger and confusion. And yet, he was here, with me. The officiant turned to me. Do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? This shouldn't be my life. I should not be forced to do this. The man had broken my heart, and it had never properly healed. The word "don't" passed quietly past my lips. Surprise registered on his face, which morphed into anger. Are you playing with me, Beau? Shit, I couldn't do it. But the alternative was unbearable. If we skip the rest, is it still legal? My hands burned where they were connected to his massive ones. I couldn't stand it much longer. The minister cleared his throat. Well, no, I need, consent to legalize the marriage. For you, Beau, to consent to this union. So, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? I hated that was what my life had become. Fine. Yes, I do. Okay, I can now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. He leaned forward. I yanked my hands out of his and placed them on his chest. Don't even think about it. Chapter 1. Beau. I have no interest in marriage. Then I sincerely hope you find some quickly. He leaned forward. These nuptials are happening. You'll behave accordingly. I loved London. It had become my home. But my father's constant pressure to marry the man of his choosing had driven me to another country. Or at least, it had forced me to stay there. But right now, I was arguing this ridiculous notion with a man I equally loved and loathed. No, that wasn't right. Today, I loathed him much more than loved. We aren't living in medieval times, Father. Arranged marriages died a few years ago. I pushed to my feet, finished with this conversation. Again. I have a closing to attend. The situation is of your own making. I gave you the chance to choose, and you squandered it. If there was one thing intolerable to Samuel Hollingsworth, it was arguing with him. I didn't do it often, but this was taking his power too far. Selecting a husband off a list of approved candidates isn't a choice. His eyes glittered with something sinister at my defiance. Sit down. Alex Davenport and his family are here and delighted to get acquainted with you. He didn't. One look at his face and I realized he wasn't bluffing. I had my limits and my father constantly pushed them. I'd just discovered what I absolutely would not do. Marry Alex Davenport. I didn't know him, had only heard of him because of his family's business reputation, and I wouldn't marry anyone else for that matter either. You didn't force Lincoln or Teague into marriage. I hated to drag my older brothers into this, but I had to use whatever defense I could find. I don't want to, didn't seem to be making the point. His nostrils flared in annoyance. You are my only daughter. I will not allow just any man to have you. A chill skittered down my spine. I'm not an object. To him, I was. Nothing more than a robot to make him money. He had the audacity to look angry. Your hand in marriage is a coveted gift. By refusing to cooperate, you've put us in an undesirable position. My father had put me in an undesirable position. He'd stepped up the pressure, cornering me daily about this since I'd returned to New York. I have done everything you ask of me, but this, I shook my head, I will never do. I most certainly did not ask you to slum it with that. It's done. I wouldn't think of Garrett Calhoun, and I wouldn't admit that my father was right. I never should have gotten involved with him. That man didn't deserve my defense, yet I was offended by how my father had referenced him. But I wouldn't waste my breath taking up for him. Scum. That would have been a more accurate description. He tilted his head and narrowed his gaze. It better be. Of course he knew what I'd been hiding. Not even my protective brothers had figured it out, and I lived with one of them. I'm going to be late. I stood taller, though I felt like a little girl in my father's presence. I've postponed your closing. You have no business purchasing that building anyway. He waved me off as if I wasn't capable of bringing in multi-million-dollar deals like I had for the past decade. He pressed the intercom on his phone. Send in the Davenports. Rage swirled from my toes all the way to the top of my head. There was only one other person who could garner this type of reaction from me. I felt like a caged animal, feral and ready to strike. Except there was no escape. My father had won this round in a single knockout blow. I gripped the back of my chair as Alexander Davenport III, according to the list of potential husbands I'd brushed off, led his parents into my father's office. Father stood and pasted on a luminous smile that the rest of the world believed was the real him. Alex, come in, my boy. I was going to be sick. He'd never treated us that way, except in front of others, where perception was everything. He bent and kissed Mrs. Davenport's cheek. Della, you look lovely as ever. And then he shook the elder Davenport's hand. Alexander, if this rain would let up, maybe we could get that golf game in. They all laughed as if this were an afternoon of old friends, but we were at the office. Clearly, it was a business transaction, and I was the commodity. This is my daughter, Beau. Father slipped an arm around my shoulders and squeezed. I pasted on the same fake smile he wore. It was automatic after years of etiquette ingrained into my head. I'm the prized cattle on display for purchase. Mr. and Mrs. Davenport shook my hand with pleasant hellos. Mr. Davenport gestured toward the younger man. This is our son, Alex. Alex stepped forward. Beau, you're even lovelier than your father described. He kissed my cheek. I stiffened, fighting down the bile threatening to surface. Hello, Alex. Discreetly, Father pinched my shoulder. Was my greeting not polite enough? I'd have been more than happy to knee Alex in the crotch or shove my heel into his foot. We are thrilled about this alliance. Mrs. Davenport put her hands together in a soft clap. As am I, Alex said darkly. If he thought he would get any closer to me than he was right now, he was sorely mistaken. Play the game, Beau. Be smart. I'd already lashed out to my father. He wasn't pleased. And if I wanted to get out of this mess, I needed to box up all my anger and use it when it was most advantageous. Now wasn't that time. This union is such a natural fit. You and Alex are perfectly suited, Mr. Davenport said. Because you want access to the power of Hollingsworth properties. Although I hadn't met them before, I was familiar with the Davenport family. They had their own successful contracting company, completing some of the most prestigious building projects around the globe. But those with money always craved more. Their status was just shy of the Hollingsworth name. What had they paid my father for the privilege of this alliance? How much was I being sold for? Because it most certainly came with a cost. They'll accomplish great things for our families. I hadn't considered Alex was just a pawn in the game, too. Though the way his gaze raked down my body, I had the impression it wasn't a hardship. Come, sit. I believe this joyous occasion calls for champagne. Father ushered the Davenports to the sitting area of his cavernous office. Alex gripped my elbow, holding me back. His gaze was greedy and triumphant. In 3 weeks, you will belong to me. I met his eyes but said nothing. I didn't belong to anyone. Not him, not my father, not to anyone but me. And that would never change.
Chapter 2. Cal. Beers, after our shift. You can't say no. John Vigiano slammed his locker shut. Can't. I pulled my FDNY t-shirt over my head. You've been saying that way too often lately. What's going on with you? Nothing I wanted to talk about. If I miss one more dinner at my ma's, she'll kick my ass. I put on a fresh shirt, a button-down, so she wouldn't complain about how I was dressed. On a Tuesday? I'll never get you people with big families. He punched my shoulder. What do I gotta do to get a beer with my best friend? Make an appointment a month in advance? I shrugged. Seemed that way these days. Let's shoot for Thursday. I'll be coming off 24 straight and we'll need it. He shot a finger gun at me. I'm holding you to it. I pulled out my phone and pretended to type. I'm putting you in my calendar. Pencil. He knocked my hand away from my phone. While you're at it, you better put in ink. Hollingsworth invited us all over to his place on Saturday. I don't know if I'll make it. Christina's on baby alert. I wanted a chance to hang out with the guys, but annoying the hell out of Bo made it too tempting to miss. How many nieces and nephews you got now? Do you even know all their names? I just call all of them kid. I lifted my chin. You heard about that promotion yet? We only had a few more years before they wanted us off the front line. After 40, a desk job or retirement were the options. I didn't like either. Not yet. 6 people applied, and I heard they were looking outside the department, he said in disgust. You better think about what you're gonna do. You ain't getting no younger. Not only did I love being a fireman, but I needed this job. I don't fit behind a desk. I grabbed my duffel bag and shut my locker. And that retirement won't cover your bills. Since when did you become a financial planner? I fist bumped him. I gotta run. I'm already late. Tell Mama Calhoun I said hey. And maybe I could get an invite over for some good food sometime? There was a time when I'd asked him to come now, but I couldn't. It was too volatile in the Calhoun household, and he didn't need to see that. Next time. It was a hollow promise, but it tamped my guilt down. Hey, spot me a 20? I need gas, but didn't have time to go by the ATM. He pulled his wallet out of his back pocket. Why would you, when you got your ATM right here? He slapped a $20 bill in my palm. Thanks, I'll hit you back tomorrow. Bring me some leftovers and we'll call it even. I shoved the bill in my pocket. You know Ma's food is worth way more than that. I hiked the bag on my shoulder, giving high fives and fist bumps to some of the other guys on the way out. My father's picture was the first and last thing I saw every time I came and went from the station. I was a 6th-generation fireman and had a trail of heroes behind me. Miss you, old man. I unlocked my '76 Suburban with the key and climbed in. She was old, but the first car I'd ever bought. I'd washed fire trucks at every station in the city until I had a down payment. She fired right up, and I closed my eyes for a second. It had been a long day. 3 fires, 8 medical calls, and equipment checks in between. My sister-in-law Christina was 8 months pregnant, and the reason I couldn't skip this dinner was that my brother Joe found out the kid wasn't his. They'd been together since high school. Joe had given her everything, even on a fireman's salary. But it wasn't enough to keep her from sleeping with his best friend. Shit. I was pissed off at Christina, but she'd been like a sister to me for 2 decades. Was I supposed to somehow love her through this disaster? I doubted I'd be able to hide my anger and disappointment. It had certainly solidified my own stance on marriage. It was not for me. I hadn't talked to Joe about it yet. Ma said he was doing okay, but I'd have to see for myself. I popped my neck a few times. Then I'd decide what the rest of my brothers and I were going to do about it. I threw my truck and drive and wheeled onto the busy street. The station was only 10 minutes from Ma's house. I'd grown up in this neighborhood. In some ways, it was the same. In others, everything had changed. I cranked up the radio and cracked the window. Little Wing by Jimi Hendrix blared from the speakers as I cruised down the familiar streets. I was born here, and I'd die here just like my dad and my grandfather and my great-grandfather had. And if it was true that that bastard Lee Stannis knocked up my brother's wife, he was a dead man first. I drummed the steering wheel. The Calhoun men weren't saints. We'd all made our fair share of mistakes. Family came first, the department second, but we did not step out in relationships, ever. Our father had instilled that in us from the time we could understand what it meant. He'd worked holidays and crazy hours, but he'd always treated our mother with respect, with a reverence. The time they had together was sacred. He never left the house without telling her he loved her. and he'd brought home flowers every week just to show he cared. All my brothers who were married did the same for their wives. I wheeled to a stop in front of Ma's house. The lights in the front window were on. I could make out my brothers Bobby and Aaron standing behind the sheer curtains in the living room. Is it too much to ask for some peace? In a family of 6 boys? Yeah, it was impossible. My hand was on the door handle when my phone chimed with a text alert. I grabbed it from the passenger seat. Need you. Now. Well, this was early. I was tempted to blow off the family dinner I was dreading anyway, but I couldn't keep jumping to attention when I was summoned. Little Miss would have to wait. Family first. Always.
Chapter 3. Beau. You're staring at that phone like it might do a magic trick. Teague pointed his spoon in my direction. Milk dripped into the bowl off the end. I should turn the stupid thing off. Della Davenport had called me no less than 6 times after we'd spent an entire afternoon acquainting our families. As if my pending nuptials to her son were a marriage of soulmates instead of a business transaction. I didn't give a damn about flowers or catering or the guest list, because I wasn't going to walk down that aisle. I shoved a spoonful of Lucky Charms in my mouth and chomped viciously. Annoying calls, I said once I swallowed. It's the craziest thing. Teague tipped the bowl up to his mouth and drank. Dad would lose his mind if he saw that. They have this button, and you can turn it off. He touched his head with his fingertips and made a motion like his head was exploding. I threw a piece of cereal at him. Mine didn't come with that. And why did I care what my father thought about how Teague ate his cereal? I couldn't even have dinner with my brother without our father invading my thoughts. What's he done now? Teague's expression turned concerned. Just the usual. What I say is law, and you must obey, I said in a fake thundering voice. Last I checked, I built a multi-billion-dollar European division. I'm pretty sure I don't need someone standing over me with a stick. Quit? I slumped in my chair. I know I shouldn't complain, especially after what he did to you and Pepper. I sniffed bitterly. Lincoln is like a shield between us anyway. My older brother had kept most of our father's attention on himself, so it wouldn't be on me. Unfortunately, he couldn't protect me from this. I meant quit the company. Get away from him. Start your own. He put on a begging face, preferably in New York. Guilt niggled at me even as my defenses rose. Neither of my brothers had any problem expressing just how much they wanted me back in the city permanently. I appreciated that they loved me enough to want me around, but I'd needed to go to London to get out from underneath the shadows of the Hollingsworth men. I'd missed my brothers, though. Every time I'd come to New York over the years, it became harder to leave. So I'd stopped. I loved my life in London, too. I'd made friends and found my little corner of the world. It was home. Until I'd been summoned by my father to return. I'd put him off for as long as I could manage. When he'd had enough, he'd threatened to take away my position. Maybe I should have let him, but I'd earned it. I wasn't going to let it go without a fight. I'd been back in New York for several weeks, and it was almost as if I'd never been gone. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed my brothers, even if they were overbearing. I'd made a family in London, but it wasn't the same. I don't want to quit. As hard as the role of vice president of the European division was, I loved it. Putting an ocean between me and my father had made it slightly easier to handle. But I loved searching out properties, turning something in disrepair into something magnificent, creating a portfolio of the most desirable properties in the world. The business was exhilarating, and I was great at it. I said start your own. He drained the rest of his milk. I don't want to do that. I spoke before I'd even considered the idea. But that was the truth. I liked where I was. Once I figured out how to get out of this farce of a wedding, I'd be on track again. You could just get on a plane back to London. I could be there in a few hours, in time for breakfast with Lawson, Annie, and Joss. They were my close girlfriends and knew nothing of the hell that existed in New York. With them, it was like I had a different life, one that I chose. I'd be safer if I went back, but I wasn't ready to yet. The professional piece of my life was nearly perfect. The personal, I had a lot to work on. Being around my brothers and my best friend had been good for my soul. I wasn't done recharging. New York isn't good for you. It was and it wasn't. I'd fallen right back into old habits as if I'd never left, but I was closer to my family than ever. "I'm going to figure out a way to make you stay," he said with determination. "Dad's already beat you to that, big brother." "Let me know what you come up with." I stretched and yawned. "Thanks for letting me come by for some late-night cereal." "It's only 11, and I was hungry anyway. You gave me an excuse to eat again." He swiped my empty bowl off the table and put it in the sink. "I can do that." He slung an arm around my shoulders. "Did you not hear? I'm working on convincing you to stay in New York." I elbowed him in the side. "By waiting on me hand and foot?" "It's better than shopping." "And look what that shopping got you. You'd have never landed Pepper without me." He kissed the top of my head. "Probably not. And if you're not around, who's going to make sure I keep her?" I groaned. "Go to bed. Give her and Miss Adeline a kiss for me." "I'll give you a ride back to Lincoln's." "No." Teague lifted a brow at my swift response. I schooled my expression into something more casual and patted his stomach. "I'm good. I've kept you from Pepper long enough." "She's out. Some of the ladies from Paths of Purpose came by today. It was good, but she's just exhausted." I hugged him. "Give her the morning off." I bent and kissed Ash's nose. "You're so quiet, I almost forgot you were here." He'd rescued the dog from a fire, and she showed her gratitude by hardly leaving Teague's side. "Talk to you tomorrow," he said as he held the front door open for me. "Love you." "Love you too. Be careful, and you can text me when you get home." I groaned again and pulled on the door to close it. "See you later." As I waited for the elevator, I checked my phone again. I had half a dozen messages, but none of them were the one I was waiting for, and that irritated me. Not that I expected him to jump at my every demand. After all, he worked just as hard as Teague did and was entitled to spend his free time as he liked. But I needed him, which I partly hated. Men, why were they all such pains in my ass? Maybe I should have let Teague drive me home.
Chapter 4. Cal. "Ma, for the love of everything holy, I don't want to talk about it." Aaron smacked Joe in the back of the head. "Have some respect." I leaned on the doorway to the kitchen. I'd walked into the house of chaos. "I've been here an hour and it's like there's nothing else happening in the world. Christina got knocked up by Lee. The end." Joe shoved past me as he stormed from the kitchen. I hadn't heard this place this quiet since Dad passed. "I'll go talk to him," I said, following my brother to the front stoop. He lit a cigarette and blew out a plume of smoke with an aggressive puff. "Those things will kill you." I stood opposite him and propped my foot against the wall. "Don't start." He was 3 years older than I was, but had always acted like he was our parents' age. "You think I'm going to stand by and watch you kill yourself and say nothing?" He sank down to the steps. "Give it a rest, Cal." "You want to talk about Christina instead?" I sat next to him, resting my forearms on my knees. "I'd prefer some silence, but good luck on that around here." He blew out another cloud of smoke. "You need to come stay with me?" He jerked his head in my direction. "She already left." What a gut punch. I hurt for my brother. He'd been married over 20 years, going home to an empty house knowing she'd moved on when he hadn't even seen it coming. I felt for him. "Maybe you need to get out of that house." He dangled the cigarette from his fingers. "Maybe." "What are you going to do?" He looked away. "What can I do? I couldn't give her what she wanted most, so she finally went and got it somewhere else." They'd been trying to have kids forever. Nothing had worked, not even the expensive fertility treatments he'd had to take a side construction job just to pay for. There were other ways. "She didn't want to adopt." He hung his head. "I thought a miracle had happened. The dad was looking down and finally gave me a son." I balled my fists. There was so much pain in Joe's voice it ripped me apart. He wasn't an easygoing kind of guy. He stood up for what was right and disarmed more arguments between our brothers than anyone else. But he was a good man, had been good to his wife. He didn't deserve this. We should have known way back when. Never used a rubber when we were kids. He snorted bitterly. I just thought we were lucky. He took another drag off the cigarette. I couldn't fix this with my fists. Hell, I couldn't fix it at all. Even if the baby by some miracle did end up being Joe's, the damage was done. She'd been screwing around in him for who knew how long. But I was going to pay a visit to Lee Stannis. He'd think twice before sticking his dick somewhere it didn't belong. And I might talk to Christina, too. She needed to face the damage she'd caused. Ma called her mother. Now the whole damn neighborhood is talking about it. He flicked the ashes. I know she means well, but I don't want people in my business. I look like a fool. No, Christina and Lee are the fools. I folded my hands. And people were going to talk whether Ma does or not. She's just taking up for you. He sighed. I know, but all I want to do is forget. I squeezed his shoulder. It won't happen. He stubbed out the cigarette. You could at least lie to me to make me feel better. I've never been good at that. Except once, when it counted, because that one lie was for the best. He shoved to his feet. We better go in. Ma will cry if we don't eat. I followed him into the house.
I don't understand why Sherry doesn't do something with that girl.
Joe's steps faltered at our mother's words. What's her mother gonna do? She's 40. It's not like they can make the baby disappear and things go back to normal. Bobby gripped his glass of tea.
Don't you dare talk about making babies disappear in this house, Robert Calhoun.
She pinched his cheek like he was 6 instead of 45. I can't do this. Joe stopped moving so fast I ran into the back of him. You can, and you will. She means well. I gave him a gentle push. She cupped my face when I entered the kitchen.
How's my baby boy?
I kissed her forehead. I'm good, Ma. Hungry. She patted my cheek.
Of course you are. Sit. Sit.
She shooed us to the table. The chair creaked when my oldest brother Bobby sat. I took my place beside him at the old table. It had been my grandmother's. Too many meals had been eaten here to count. I wasn't much for arguing over wooden nickels, but I hoped one day this table belonged to me. Oh, it probably should go to one of my other brothers, one of them with a bunch of kids and a family who could enjoy sitting around it every night. Where's Michelle? Bobby took a swig of water. Taking the kids to dance or baseball or art. I can't keep up. He scrubbed his face as if he were exhausted from carting them around. They're coming on Sunday. Sunday? Ma's cooking a big thing for after Mass. Shit. I gotta work Sunday. Want me to talk to Dunn? If you tell Ma you're working one more time, she'll go down there and do it herself. I didn't need my older brother or my mother talking to Captain on my behalf. I'd never hear the end of it from the guys at the station.